everyone. Welcome to the Zone to Speak podcast. I'm your host, Juliana. Hi, everyone. At Zone to Speak, I know how important it is to stay healthy, strong, and ready for every ride, workout, and adventure. That's why I have got exclusive discounts on some of my favorite products designed specifically for athletes like you. Psych Plus. Their Smart Pump is a game changer, compact, efficient, reliable, and perfect for keeping your tires road and gravel ready. Plus, they have radar tail lights, smart trainers, smart fans, and more. Get 10% off the Smart Pump and 5% off everything else. 35% off Frey Skincare. Skincare made for athletes, designed for skin that sweats. Their all-natural, vegan, and cruelty-free products keep your skin protected and fresh. I have been using Frey for years, and I love it. 10% off Cold Age. Premium vitamins and supplements to fuel your body, speed up recovery, and help you ride longer. I personally take the Women's Fermented Vitamin and Creatine, both powder and capsules. 10% Clearly Not Coffee, the ultimate coffee alternative made from functional ingredients to fuel your focus and energy without the caffeine crash. Try it out. 15% off Omri supplements. Whether you are training, recovering, or pushing for peak performance, their high-quality supplements have you covered. And there's something special from me, your host. As a certified integrative health nutrition expert and holistic life coach, I am thrilled to offer all my listeners 25% off personalized nutrition and life coaching with Genki Wellness. If you want to optimize your health or simply feel your best, head to bemoregenki.com and use the code ZONE2SPEAK. For all the discounts, check the episode description for the links and use Zone to Speak code at checkout. And let these amazing products support your health and performance. Now, let's get into the episode. Today, I am thrilled to host the incredibly talented Eleanor Moseman, a photographer, storyteller, and modern-day adventuress. Between 2008 and 2020, Eleanor was based in China, and for 2 years, she embarked on an extensive solo cycling journey across Asia, covering over 15,000 miles through 7 countries. This expedition allowed her to intimately document the lives of the people in the western borderlands of China, including Tibet and Uyghur, providing a unique perspective on those regions. In this episode, I will dive into her extraordinary journey, exploring the intersection of art, culture, and adventure, from stories behind her stunning photography to her experiences navigating these remote and complex regions. Eleanor brings us a deeply personal and thought-provoking perspective. Fear is her power. Get ready for a conversation filled with inspiration, insight, and a celebration of humanity through the lenses of a true explorer. Eleanor, welcome to Zone to Speak.
Hey, Juliana. Thanks for having me. Your intro is going to make me cry. That was very beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, it's all you. It's all you. I am so happy you made the time. I was looking forward to this for a long time. I've been following you, and I think you are amazing as a photographer, as a woman, as a cyclist. You know, you've been going to these remote regions and documenting, stories through your photography. So if I take a step back, how did you become even interested in photography?
Well, I was that child that always drew, and I've been going through some personal things in life that have made me kind of go back to why I was that kid that just kind of retreated to quiet places and drew constantly. And I started winning awards for my drawing. I remember I won a pizza party for my class in first grade.
Awesome.
So I've never known anything else but being an artist. Like that was just it. It was my calling from the very beginning. And so I took, I was in all the art classes and did all the awards and was that, star art student up through high school. And then I started applying to colleges and I wanted to go to art school so badly, so badly. And I applied and I was accepted to some of the best art schools in the country, but my parents looked at me and said, "We can't afford that." And I think I can look back at that moment and just realize like some of us are dealt a deck of cards where we have to find our own way through it. And I think at that young age, I mean, it was 17, just realizing like, well, as I used to tell my dad, life isn't fair. And he would tell me, "You're right, get over it." So I just remember crying and crying and crying and crying, wishing that I could go to these art schools. And so I just kind of gave up for a brief moment and I ended up going to a university that was in my hometown. I actually failed out of my painting class because it was at 8 o'clock in the morning and that teacher ripped my paintbrush out of my hand and she's like, "You're doing it wrong. This is how you do it." And she like put my paint on my canvas. I was like, okay, this world like really isn't for me. Um, so I was painting and drawing from photographs, and I eventually went back to school a year later after taking some time off, and went to school in Richmond, Virginia. It was actually a public university in the state of Virginia where I grew up, so tuition was a little bit more affordable, and they have a really good art program. And so I took some art foundation courses and I applied to the photography program. I was around 19, 20, and it stuck. And I excelled in the program. I got out. I had these grandiose dreams of moving to New York City and being a photographer. I ended up in New York City. Those dreams, again, didn't work out the way I thought they were going to. And I was photo assisting, and I actually worked in a photo studio where we photographed artwork for private artists, artwork for galleries, artwork for museums. I saw some of the most amazing art. Like, I've seen original Warhols, I've seen original work that is just unbelievable. But I remember having conversations with artists, and I remember having conversations with gallery owners, and the mix of like gallery owners coming in their fancy cars and suit being like, "Oh yeah, we found the next young hot artist." And then the artist coming in being like, "Eleanor, can you take payments on these photography services? Because I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills." And so I was like, I saw the art world and I was like, this is not what I want to be involved in. Like, it's not me. Like, it's not who I am. And I met some really amazing artists that gave me words of wisdom about the world. And I remember one artist being like, "How old are you?" And I was like, 23, I'm 24. And he's like, give it till you're 35. Then you'll have a better idea. And I remember thinking, "Well, what do you mean? I know everything right now." But, anyway, so this is kind of a waffling way of telling how I got into photography. I was burned out on it. I took some time off. I had a partner I met in New York who was Taiwanese American, and his brother was working in Shanghai, China, and he offered my partner a job there, and Jason is his name. And he looked at me and said, "Hey, do you want to move to China?" And I did not like New York City. I was barely making it by. I was photo assisting. I was, I think, 25 at the time. And I saw this as an opportunity like, yeah, get me out of here. Like, I want to go. So I got to China and started pushing into the world of photography. And that's pretty much where it kind of stuck.
Wow. Yeah, I can see how you saw the art world clashing, with the artists versus gallery owners. And I guess this intertwined road that brought you to photography, I guess it was good because you could see different parts of the industry, and you are an amazing photographer.
Well, thank you. But, another thing that opened me up was that I was, I say it's so young now, but I know at the time I didn't think that. I didn't have any life experiences. And I would look at the art that came in and I would like talk to the artists or learn about the art, and they had such a rich like life of experiences. And I knew that like being a photo assistant and sitting in a studio in New York City was not going to give me like the awareness and introspection and all these things that are needed to make like truly like riveting work that people can feel.
Yeah, your thirst for knowledge, for experience. So you made your way to Shanghai. And what drew you to start this journey through Tibet and Uyghur and Ladakh for your work?
How blunt do you want me to be?
As
Um,
blunt as you want, you can share with us.
I've always kind of held it back a little bit about being completely honest. And a friend recently asked me, he was like, so why did you do this? And because people still ask me, and I'm like, I hated my life and I wanted to die. And it was like leaving Shanghai on a bicycle was the easiest and most safest and best way to just disappear.
Escape
And
reality.
yeah, and I got to Shanghai. I couldn't speak the language. My partner was working long hours. He spoke Mandarin. And if you've ever seen that movie Lost in Translation, like it speaks to me on such a deep level. And I'd always been obsessed with Asia ever since I was in high school. And I'm even one of those Americans that made the poor choice of getting Chinese tattoo when I was 18. But
I
luckily the
have one of
characters are
those as
good.
well.
It's a generational thing, right?
Yeah.
Luckily the Chinese people are like, "Oh, I love your tattoo. It's such a nice character." I'm like, "Okay, thanks."
And I lived in New
But
York, and every time I went to Chinatown, they pointed out and laughed, but it's okay. It's okay.
well, we're around the same generation, so yeah, that was the thing. So I got there and I just got so depressed. And looking back at it, I still try to make sense of it all. I just was so lost. I just didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know who I wanted to be. I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to do. And, in my early 20s, I was one of those angry punk rock kids that listened to metal and was just so like pent up against the, the, the situation that we all see in the world. And I don't know if it was because I'm hyper aware or just extremely sensitive, which I was always told. And, I saw it as a bad thing. But I was so isolated in China and I felt so alone and so like away. As like I just felt so like just in my own planet. And I didn't have the money to travel China the way I saw most people travel. And I remember taking a bus ride with my partner to a mountain, and I just remember sitting in the bus being like, I just want the bus to stop so I can go like talk to those people in the village. Like I just want to like stop and like talk to these people. And going back a little bit, like how my interest in like looking at people, you'll hear photographers, at least I do, a lot of photographers say, "Oh, National Geographic, I used to look at those magazines and just want to be that photographer." I looked at those magazines, I want to be like, I just want to be a fly on the wall and like live with these people and just experience it all. Like that's what I want to do. So I got really depressed, and I remember Christmas morning my partner was working. I'd been in China for maybe 5 to 6 months. Just the lowest of the low of my entire life. And I just remember thinking, I have to do something about this. Either I'm going to die or I just need to disappear and like figure this out. And so I looked at my partner one day, a few days after that. We were young. He didn't understand what I was going through. And I looked at him. I said, let's do a bike tour across China because it was cheap and like I could budget that. And he looked at me and goes, no, you do it then. And I was like, okay. So I've spent months and months and months researching, looking over maps, talking to people. My partner, we're actually still very good friends, and he was very supportive of the whole endeavor. And so on May of 2010, I finally rode my bicycle out of Shanghai in the direction of west. I had no planned route. I had no serious agenda. I was just going to go west. That's all I thought. And
Incredible. And did you have, so you said you had a bike, so you used your bike. You were just like a casual leisure cyclist?
yeah, so I always commuted by bicycle when I was in college, and then I moved to New York City where I met my partner at the time, and I was a cigarette smoker as well. And he said, "I have this extra fixed gear track bike. I'll give it to you if you quit smoking." And
I like him.
he's a good guy. He's a very good guy. And so I'd had other boyfriends that had tried to convince me to quit smoking. I was like, okay, it's a deal. So we rode fixed gears around New York City, that whole scene of I guess that was like around 2004, 2005. I would go out to the park and do laps with him. He would race at the velodrome. So I got to like learn about all this stuff. And then when we got to Shanghai, he helped me get a road bike. And and then when I decided to do the bike tour, I wrote to Soma Fabrications in California, and they sponsored me with a frame because I had wrote to them telling them who I was and what made me a little bit different than everybody else. And I was based in China and I spoke a little bit of the language. So finding those little pieces that make you a little bit different.
Nice.
So
Okay, so you got your bike, you got some bike bags, you pack your stuff, and you go west.
mhm.
And then what happens next? Tell me. I'm like sitting on the edge of my seat.
Well, the reason I headed west was because I was at this noodle restaurant in Shanghai, and there was it was Uyghur food, Xinjiang food. And I asked Jason's brother, my partner's brother, I was like,
Yeah.
who are these people? They do not look Chinese. And he goes, oh, they're from China. And so he started explaining to me who the Uyghurs were and the region. And so of course I just go home. I start like researching everything. And I'm so like, oh my God, like this place is like, I just want to ride towards Kashgar. I'm just going to go ride west. Kashgar is a major trade route on the ancient Silk Road. I was familiar a little bit with Tibet because my partner is Buddhist and his mother is, believer of Dalai Lama and Tibetan Buddhism. So I kind of knew a little bit about all of that. And my partner being Taiwanese, I kind of knew about the situation with Taiwan. So I had a little bit of political awareness and geopolitics and such, but hopped on the bike, went west. Well, planned on going west, but I first headed north along the Grand Canal. So I was going to go all the way up to the Russian border. And then I ended up going into Mongolia for a little while. And Jason, my partner at the time, he joined me for a little bit into Mongolia, but I got really sick and I didn't, and my camera, like one of my smaller cameras was taken from me. So
Oh.
I was like, I speak Chinese. This is hard. Like, I don't like being in Mongolia. It's cold. I'm sick. No one, like, I can't speak to people. So we left Mongolia and I looked at my budget for a little while and realized I had some money situations. So I went back to Shanghai and worked for a couple months, saved up, and then went back out west. And within a few months, I found myself in Tibet. And then there was, I don't know if it's an arrest, but my passport was confiscated. I was put into police custody, escorted out of Tibet, and then took a
Wow,
month or two to
why?
recover from that. Oh, I crossed a border illegally.
Okay. That will do. Were you distracted on the bike or you knew
Distracted
what you were
with.
doing?
So I was in part of Tibet, Eastern Tibet, which is more free to travel through. And then there's a region called Tibet Autonomous Region, which is what more lay people think of Tibet, where you need a permit to get into, and Lhasa is there. But there's actually three kingdoms of Tibet, and this can get really confusing. But anyways, I was in Eastern Tibet and I hear this American cyclist screaming at me, "Hey, you have my bicycle." And he came running up to me and I was like, "Are you on drugs?" And he had the same bicycle as me. He had a
Wow, what a
Masada, and
coincidence.
he had actually had the prototype because he had lived in San Francisco. And we started riding together. I was like, oh, this is fun. Like, he's fun. We were riding on single track, really pushing limits. We were sneaking back by like police checkpoints at night. He's like, let's go to Tibet. And I'm like, oh, well, why not? Sure.
Try again.
So we
The
went
border
towards
this
it.
time.
Yeah. And so there were two coal trucks. And we had this thing where I would wave down the trucks and then he would like jump out and like wheel and deal with them about getting us over the border. So my bike was tied to the top of a coal truck and his bike was tied to the top of another coal truck. And they took us over the border around 4 o'clock in the morning and then unloaded us. And he and I had a major fight a day later in Tibet and we separated. He had the maps. He
Oh
had the
no.
gasoline for the stove. He had the working stove because I had just thought, oh, well, we'll ride together so we can like kind of split up things. And that was a point in my life where I told myself I will always, always, always be self-sufficient, no matter who's with me, no matter what. Like have my own tools, have everything to keep me alive because you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get to Tibet and how you start connecting with people in the communities and documenting your journey.
Yeah, I guess it happened probably leading up to Tibet. So even like early on the bike tour, I went really, really slow. I was not looking to race through it. I was fortunate to have a work permit, so I didn't need to get out in 90 days. I just took it really slow. And I had studied Chinese a little bit, but I joke and tell people I learned Mandarin Chinese on the streets. And which I literally did, like just talking to people. And this was before Google Translate. So, I was using Chinese maps. So I would type in the character to learn it. And so I actually learned how to read and write Chinese mostly from reading maps. But it started off really, really early about connecting with people. And I I haven't talked about this a lot, but being a woman, we have so many advantages over men traveling alone. I am always invited into homes. I'm like to the point where I have to like turn them down. I'm left with children. And like I share my stories with men and it's just a completely different story. So I don't know if it's fair to say, but like I tell women who are apprehensive, I'm like, if you have like look for your power as a woman. Like we have something we can offer and give as traveling by ourselves because I'm it's to the point where I'm just like, no, I have to keep riding my bike. I cannot come in for another cup of tea. And
Well,
like
I'm glad to
I
hear this because I'm always terrified of being alone on my bike. So that it's true. There we need to focus on the positives and not let fear drive and not be out there and have these adventures. Or like you, it's not just an adventure. You are actually capturing true stories and a lot of social and environment issues.
Yeah, and it's just I think just embrace it. There haven't been many times where I haven't been able to get help when I've been in bad situations. And I remember in Tajikistan, after almost going down in a river, this Russian man comes up to me. He's like, "You are a woman. We are men. We are here to help you." And I just remember thinking, "Okay, well, I'm glad that still exists." Oh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I started connecting with people probably from the very beginning. I could speak enough Chinese. I could talk. I met so many women and young girls that like wanted to ask me about America, ask me about school. And I learned so much by talking to women. Like I remember this one girl very early on telling me how her elder sister couldn't get married because she had too good of an education. And like I just started learning all these things about women and just Yeah, I was just, they just open up to me because it's like, oh, well, there's this woman here that's willing to listen. I'm just going to tell her everything. And so I've heard so many stories. And yeah, the photography just kind of happened. It, it, I was actually going through my files yesterday and I can see the progression of me as a photographer. In the very beginning, it was very like voyeuresque, very otherly, very exoticism, just portraits of people, and I wasn't recording their names. Within 2 years, I have their names, I have their phone numbers. It's more of a story about them rather than just, oh, click of the camera, let me move on. Your question was about connecting to people in Tibet. So in Tibet, that's what captured my heart. That was just the hook. It's probably an unhealthy obsession at this point. It's just, and especially in East Turkestan, which is also known as Xinjiang, that captured my heart too. There's a big chunk of the world that just has just stuck into me and I cannot get rid of it.
And how has this cultural immersion impact your storytelling and your own personal growth?
Oh, there's a few moments. I was actually just talking to a researcher with Tibetan Buddhism today about how explorers 100, 150 years ago used to take photographs of Tibetans and dress them up and pose them and have them act these things out. I was always stared at in China. I'm almost 6 foot and a white American speaking Chinese on a bicycle by herself. So I was always stared at. So it's kind of oblivious to me. But I remember this one moment I was in Tibet and I had asked for some help, and this woman had given me a room with this big window. It was probably 8 feet wide, 5 feet high, in the middle of nowhere, Tibet. This is when I had entered illegally, so I was trying to stay away from the police. And I look over, and there's probably 20 Tibetan faces staring at me through the window. I felt like I was a zoo animal. And I remember looking at their faces and I remember thinking, I will never, ever, ever, ever allow somebody to feel the way I was feeling at that moment. And to always be so aware of how I look at somebody, how I photograph somebody. I need to know who they are. I need to know their name. I need to have permission. I need all of this because that moment, I can close my eyes and still see all these like weather beaten reddish purple cheeks just staring at me, but their mouths gaping open and just like, yeah, I can't do that to people. Like this is just, we're all people. Like, and so that was a moment that was like, this is, this is a big lesson to you. Some other things when I'm in really tough situations. So I raced the Silk Road mountain race in 2022. I remember being out there, and there's other times too that I think about all the people that I've met that have told me they would love to do what I wanted, what I do. And I always think about them to get me through tough situations. I think about the
Yeah.
people that can't can't do these things. And it's like you use the word inspiration, and I've really, really been like battling this word of inspiration. And like I said earlier, some of us are dealt a deck of cards, and I know for a fact that there are women, and they've told me they cannot have the life I have because of culture, religion, geography. It's just not going to happen. And so that whole of, oh, well, you're the only person that's standing in your way. Find your strength. The fact of the matter is they can't and they won't. And there's been other times where I've been sexually assaulted and harassed in Asia, and I get so angry. I get so angry. The last time it happened, if I had caught that man, I would have ended up in prison. And I just think about when I remind myself, I have the privilege to get on my bicycle and ride away and never come back. I have the privilege to go to the police. I have the privilege to tell my friends in the village. But there are young women that this happens to countless times, and they can't say anything and they can't leave, and they don't, they have to live with that for the rest of their lives. So these are like, they're very sad, they're very upsetting, they're very depressing moments of but I keep all of that in me, and I remind myself, like, there's just simply women that cannot do what we do. And, when bad things happen to me, I'm just like, well, I get to put on my backpack and walk out of here, or I get the choice to wave down a taxi and get out of here. So those have been moments that have opened my eyes to how to live or how to be. But on more positive moments, Tibetan and Uyghur culture really taught me how to stand up and fight for what you believe in. And like, you're not supposed to have a photo of the Dalai Lama in Tibet, but I know plenty of Tibetans that have his picture. Uyghurs are continually persecuted for everything as well. And those women are fierce. I have spent time in living rooms and kitchens with these women, and they are fiery. And since then, when I look at protests, when I look at activists, it's these women that are just using their voice. And I think I've told people, I think Uyghur women are the group of women that taught me what womanhood is. Like, they're so dedicated to their family, religion, culture, but they're willing to stand up. And I think, it's just these lessons. Tibetan women, again, a very, very difficult, hard life. And with Tibet, it's kind of a caricature. And I talked to other people who have spent a lot of time there, and I actually brought my mom out once, and she was like, "So do the men work?" And I'm like, "Oh, you caught on." Well, they're going to ride motorcycles around for a while and go smoke cigarettes and, come back. Not all Tibetan men, but I remember this one day, one of my friends, she was carrying a big tea chest like out of her house on these like old metal steps, and her husband is at the bottom directing her on how to do it, and she has a big rope and this tea chest on her back that's probably like, again, like 5 feet wide, 6 feet high, and she's just like carrying it down the steps because they've made like a little summer home, and she sleeps on the floor when her husband and son sleep in a bed. So this is just like one story. So it's like,
So is that cultural that the women are giving up so much for the man, husband, or son? And
I really hate making broad sweeping stereotypes. I've seen it both ways. So I've seen younger generations talk to me about, like, younger generations will be open with me and they're really trying to change things. But you've traveled a bit. You've traveled a bit in conservative areas. It's
yeah.
hard to make those stereotypes, but I mean, I've witnessed it, but I've also witnessed beautiful and amazing loving relationships. There's this woman named Ditchin, and I actually wear a necklace that she gave me years ago. Her family is like, "Oh, Detchin's lucky. She fell in love with her husband. They were collecting caterpillar fungus and he was singing in the mountains and they fell in love." And you can see it. You can see it between these two. He is an equal partner every way about it. She will go out and swing that axe and chop the firewood, but he will help with the kids. So broad sweeping stereotypes I really try to avoid, but I've seen both ends of it, and I've been in communities and villages and homes where it's just women, and they're like, "We don't need men. Like, keep them out of here." So it's a universal thought. So yeah, I have a variety of stories. So I try not to paint a brush on everything, because I've seen some really beautiful relationships, and I've also seen the other end of it. And I know that the younger generations are really trying to fight against it. I think it's just, a little behind Western thought as well. We still have the same thing here.
Exactly what I say when people ask me. I spent 10 years in the Middle East and I love that region. It's home to me. My daughter was pretty much raised there, from 4 to 14. It's a lot of core years. And yeah, I don't like to do general statements either, but it is a beautiful region, and all this thing about silencing a woman, it also happens in the Western world. Violence against women happens in the Western world. It's just easier to point out just because a woman is covered. And I know a lot of amazing and young women that are wearing abayas or covering their hairs by her choice. Yes, there's also the extreme spectrum where some families will not allow you to not be uncovered, but there's a lot of women that actually choose that. It is their culture. That's what they're comfortable with. The end.
Yes. Oh, I hear, man, we need to liberate women from wearing hijabs and
They are
covering. I'm like, what?
liberated. They don't-
I remember this one moment. It was the first time in East Turkestan. I had just started interacting with Uyghurs, and this woman, she's probably around our age at the time. She goes, "What is it with you Western women? You wear all this makeup trying to cover up who you really are, and we're over here covering ourselves up because our family thinks we're beautiful. Why should I share my beauty with just anybody or everyone?" And I was just like, okay.
Different points of view, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Liberation is just letting people do what they want to do.
100%. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Accepting each other's differences and cultures and let it be.
Yeah.
So just going back to all these stories, at the end, I mean, there was a lot because you were on the road for 2 years. What was your biggest takeaway? What did you want to say with your storytelling through your pictures to bring awareness to these people? I mean, don't know if you want to get political or environmental, social, or it was just to share their culture.
You made me go zip through about a decade and a half in my brain of trying to figure this out. So there's actually this one moment. So I actually have just applied to a writing fellowship to write this story about the 3 weeks I was in Tibet, basically trying to avoid the police and on my own. And I remember ending that writing relationship being like, do I continue to be mistreated and continue to be belittled and continue to be made to feel this way, or trust that I can take care of myself? Trust that I have the skills and the experience to get myself through this. I trusted myself. I trusted myself. And that was such a pivotal point in my life. And so when I think about when I have these moments in regular daily life where I don't trust myself, I have to remind myself trusting myself has gotten me to where I was. But about a week and a half in, I have so many weird stories from then. I don't know if it was because I was starving. I don't know if I was because of high altitude. I've had people tell me I was on a vision quest. I don't know what was going on. I kept it a secret for a couple of years because I had people come in and then they would leave. I had mental breakdowns on the plateau. I have had every single emotion, but I remember this one moment. I'm sitting on the plateau. I cannot see anybody. I see two buses a day, one in one direction, one in the other. That's how no life, no life. And there's this Tibetan antelope that keeps making its appearance to me, one, two, and then I start seeing tracks. But I remember I had found a water source. I had climbed up a bit to find the water source, and I remember seeing all their hoof prints. I'm like, oh, they're around. That's part of the story for another time. But I remember sitting there and the sun was setting. And I just remember sitting and staring. And this is why I do things by myself. It's because I do a lot of sitting and thinking. So I was just sitting and I just remember looking over this plateau and just thinking, I could die here and be okay. This is so beautiful. I am at such peace with myself. I feel complete. I feel like I know who I am. I know what I want to do. I could really just die here and be okay. And then thinking, but people count on me. It would devastate my mom. It would devastate my dad. All these people that would be like, oh, well, Eleanor never came back. And, I just started thinking, this life really isn't for me. It's for other people. I'm this is the point of life. It's not to gain money, it's not to gain fame, it's not to be Instagram famous. It is literally here to help other people not suffer as much as we all do. And that's the Buddhist thought, life is suffering, and no one's suffering is more or less than the other. It's all suffering. And I was thinking about every little motion I do. Cause like I remember like looking at my hands and I could hear my heart like pumping blood through my body because it's so silent out there. And I remember just thinking every motion I make, every movement I make, every pedal stroke, everything is affecting energy in this universe and ultimately affecting something else, the butterfly effect. But I really like visually saw how every single motion affects something else. And that was just like, yeah. So if you want to have like these enlightenment moments, don't eat a lot and go out on the plateau and ride your bike. But yeah, that's like, I still just think like it's at that moment. And my batteries of my camera were dying because of the high altitude and the cold. So I was really conserving my battery power. So that whole trip, I don't have a lot of photos. And I am a firm believer that if I don't take photos, I remember it more. Photos like are there, but if I put the camera down, like it's like burned into my memory.
Interesting.
And so it's just that was the moment. And I tell people want to know why my connection is there. And I tell people like rebirth, like the person I was before the Tibetan plateau, she's still here, but she doesn't exist. And I tell people like when I go back out to Tibet, I'm kind of like honoring or like visiting who I was and reminding myself who I became. And I've talked to my monk friends about, reincarnation and our current life. And they're like, yeah, of course it can happen. I, it was, I guess it was September of 2011. I can look at that month and just be like, that person up to that point doesn't really exist. I came back and wrote apology emails to people in high school for like
Wow.
things I had done and said. And I was like, I'm not that person. I'm not that person. And it just has stuck with me. Like life should be somewhat about servitude. And only until the last handful of years, I realized that that also includes myself.
Well,
So
thanks for sharing. I'm glad you shared this because I was going to ask you. You started this journey because you were in a very low moment mentally. And I was going to ask you, like, how were you evolving mentally in this trip? And then you just told me about this rebirth, this amazing experience. So I'm glad to hear that getting on a bike, going out there, being around all these other people in other culture and really having this experience gave you this self knowledge and this rebirth where you felt like a completely different person.
yeah, I mean, it, I can pin it down and it just sticks with me. And I'm sure you can relate to this as well. And I think most anybody that spent an extensive time on a bicycle in the middle of nowhere, life and this society and culture just eats away at us, you
It
know?
does. It
And
does.
and I catch myself falling into the traps of, oh, I need to buy this. I need to have that. But when I'm out there, it's like I
You
always
don't
tell
need
myself when I go out there,
anything.
I know I always come home and throw away a bunch of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I started having those experience when I used to alpine climb and I used to go, obviously climb a mountain and you are so many days in isolation almost. And when I would come back and go to work, it was just so hard to adapt. It's hard to adjust. Yeah.
It is, and sometimes I say it ruined my life. And it's like I would never go on another bike trip that long. It took years to recover from that. Like I literally was having flashbacks because and it's like when I see people suffering with addictions or depression, I just tell myself and sometimes I tell them the world's just too much for you. You think too much, you feel too much, you see too much. Like, you haven't built that callousness, and good for you. Like, don't build that wall. Like, don't push it out. Like, you just aren't meant for here. Go find somewhere else where you're meant for.
Absolutely. And that takes me to you came back to the US recently. So how is all this adjustment going?
Oh, it's been really hard. I was actually in Tibet when COVID hit. I was I had already gotten over the borders when I was actually on a train when a friend messaged me, "Hey, there's been an outbreak." And my train actually went through Wuhan. I got out west. Everything started shutting down. Luckily, with my Chinese ability, I was able to like beg police officers, show hotel receipts. "Hey, see, I've already been here. Please don't send me back. Please don't send me back." 3 weeks in Tibet, I was going to visit friends that I've been doing a long-term story on since 2014. I couldn't see them. I had to leave China. I kind of knew what was going to happen, so I cleared out a storage unit as much as I could. I had already been making plans on moving back to the US, but not in this way. I went back to Ohio, the Midwest of the US, because that's where my mom was. And I thought, this is just going to be temporary. It's just going to be temporary. It was not temporary.
How long were you there? Or are you still there?
No, I live in Bend, Oregon now. I have a wonderful partner that I met when I was doing my first ultra race here in Oregon. So I got back on the
Nice.
bicycle, and so we met, and then we started dating about a year and a half after we met. So I got out of the Midwest. I wanted to be in Oregon or Washington for a while. So it's been a tough adjustment. 6 months. The first 6 months were really tough, but I stayed active. I was doing I was making my mom do yoga with me. I was using the trainer. I was building a new bicycle, getting interested in ultra endurance racing. I did open a photo studio, which I closed down about a year ago because I learned that that's not what I want, among other things. And so it will be almost 5 years in about 3 or 4 weeks. I did take the time to start studying Tibetan. It's something I wanted to do for a long, long, long time and always found a reason that I was too busy to do it. And it is literally one of the hardest things I have ever done. But there are people I want to communicate with so badly. And there are a few people that this is why I'm doing it. And I was working with a weight trainer a few months ago, and she goes, "Do you do anything for yourself?" I'm like, "Yeah. I get up at 5:30 in the morning to study Tibetan." She's like, I'm like, I do it for myself. This is me. By 7 o'clock in the morning, I have done the hardest thing I could possibly do for the day. And I'm not good at language. I'm awful at language. But so I've been doing
I
that.
don't
I'm
think you
still
are.
studying.
I don't think you are. Okay.
So yeah, so the first 2 years back was really tough. No international travel. And then I did the Silk Road Mountain Race in 2022. That kind of like broke the doors open, like get back out there, do it. And then I spent 6 months in India, late 2023, and then the summer of 2024.
How was Silk Road? I
It
would
was,
love to do that, but it's just long and I don't know. Also, a mountain bike. I don't have a mountain bike.
I found you on the internet because I was looking for other women my age that were looking for something more in life, and I sensed you kind of got it. I, the Silk Road, at first I wanted to do it again. And the reason I did it initially was because I was hired by Brooks England to be a photographer because I had bike toured Kyrgyzstan. And they needed somebody who knew the place, knew the culture. I was still based in China. So I went in 2018. It was my first exposure to ultra endurance racing. I was like, what is this? Sure, I'll go photograph a race. And I got there, I was like, what? And I remember interviewing Jay Peterberry, and the way he talked about mountains and the way he talked about riding, I was like, this dude is insane. And I totally relate to him. And being a photographer, I got behind scenes of some of these cyclists, and to finish that race, you have to understand the mountains. That's all it is, and not listen to that voice in your head. There were people that were so ill prepared for mountain exposure, like, and I just remember thinking, this isn't about being fast. This is about being smart. And so, like, I was determined, like, I'm gonna prove to myself that, like, I still have the brains to survive in mountains. So I've only done 2 ultra endurance races, and I am at the point. I have some chronic health issues. I came back from Silk Road just wrecked. I have reoccurring Epstein-Barr virus, which is basically like mono that gets reactivated.
Yeah.
So I'm learning that life is too short, and I don't want to race through it. Like, I want to take every little piece as possible. And I finished the Silk Road 15 minutes before cutoff. I think I was like 7 minutes late for checkpoint 3. I didn't care. I was just going to finish. And I remember seeing Nelson at the end of the race. I was like, I didn't want it to end. And I learned that I have bike touring brain, where I'm like, I got 2 weeks to finish this. I'm going to enjoy it. I got 2 weeks. It's okay.
That's where I am now. I used to love being competitive and testing my limits, but no, I want to soak it in. I want to see, I want to be immersed. I want to take my time. Why rush it? Why not see everything that you can? Eat everything that you find on the way and smile at people. That's why I like the ultras. There is a route. There is usually amazing people doing the same thing. You meet
Mhm.
like-minded people, and I really, really hope we get to ride one day together.
I would love that.
Yeah,
I would love that.
gotta make that happen.
Yeah, so the whole racing thing, and I think that's why we see such a difference in age. And I remember meeting these men in their late 50s. They would stop, they would chat with me. I was last, and one guy was like, "Don't worry about it. You're Lantern Rouge. It's a very important position." And like, he was like middle of the race, he finished, and he was probably in his late 50s. I just noticed such a difference between the attitude of 20-year-olds and 50-year-olds. And I'm like, these guys know what's up. They're just out here to ride, enjoy, have a good time, keep up with their fitness. They're retired, whatever. Like, brand sponsorship does not pay your bills. And I think you've been around long enough to see, like, names and fame come and go. Like, I was telling Eric, my partner, I was like, I can't even remember some of these names. It's like they were hot 10 years ago. What happened to them? That was the same thing with bike touring. When I was bike touring, all these people getting funding and free stuff. I literally cannot remember their name or their website. It's just like, I'm at a point where I'm just like, just live for yourself. Like, we don't have anything to prove at this point.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I'm with you. And so
And
what's
and
next for
no
you?
no
Oh,
oh
go ahead.
and no ill thoughts for people who do race. I understand
Yeah,
why people do it.
absolutely.
It's just not for me anymore. At least I
Yeah.
tried it.
But even I think a lot of people that race, my husband, we usually do the same races, but he's there to race. And a lot of times, we're looking at pictures and he's just like, oh, I didn't see that. Oh, I didn't see that. And I'm like, well, you pass it at night. So, and it's
Yeah.
fine. We all get our different satisfaction out of this, right? So it's all good.
Yeah. And life is hard. I don't need to choose more hardness.
Agree. Agree. And, even doing for fun, it's still a good challenge. It's not
Yeah,
easy.
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there are some points in that race where I was just crying, bawling my eyes out, and, like, again, moments of epiphany, and it's like, I mean, it does happen out there.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of mental clarity that happens when you are in these challenging situations and with your thoughts for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, what's next for you in cycling and on your photography journey?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about the dot. I spent some time there last year. I met some young women, 18, 19, 20. I was doing some volunteer work at a women's empowerment camp, doing some photography, and I connected with these young women on, like, on everything, politics, the way they saw the world, but even like their love of mountains. And I have stayed in contact with them. And last summer, I'm starting to finally get into video, finally, after all these years. And I have some video people that are like, Eleanor, your access to parts of the world, like this adventure storytelling is so male dominated. Like, you've got to get in there. You've got to do this. So these young women, they're Muslim. They're from Kargil, which is border with Pakistan. We went hiking in the mountains and they're like wearing their hijabs. They're like they're little goats in the mountains. And I was so impressed. And when we talk, like the love for mountains and how they tell me it makes them feel free and it's their therapy and they're like going into little villages and talking to people. So for me, I want to tell their stories. I've also done some like trying to get contacts for me to get training or for other people to have training and come in and help these girls like be in the mountains. And I told them, I was like, oh, I want to come back in the summer. We'll do a summer camp. And they all want to learn how to drive. And I'm like, yeah, well, I'll teach you how to drive. Like, it'll just be like one of these things. And because I would reach out to men guides being like, hey, these women really want to guide in the mountains. They really want to do this. They're really good at it. They're basically hiking in Crocs. Like, it's unbelievable. We think that we need thousands and thousands of dollars of gear. And these little girls are just like, excuse me for saying these little girls, these young women are like just barreling through. And so there's a part of me that wants to share their story through media, but there's also a part of me that wants to help them like get the support they need to get out there more. So that's there. I also did some video and photos of a young Indian man that was in Ladakh. He's 18, 19. Super talented. I was going to do a story on him, and he was going up to Kashmir to ride, and his bicycle got stolen from the top of the bus. Yeah. So I've been trying to get a hold of him. He finally has reappeared, and I'm like, Sagar, let's do something. Let's try to get you a bike. So my partner Eric, he used to race mountain bikes and he's a bike mechanic, and I would send him photos of Cigar, and he's like, this little dude has like potential. So he's another person. So I have some film, and I wanted to follow him to his hometown and do more video, but he was like, I don't know. He was just very depressed after the bike was stolen, and he was just like, I don't want to be filmed. I don't want to be filmed, ma'am. And I'm like, come on. So I also don't pressure people. Once they tell me they don't want filming, it's like, okay, well, maybe I'll try a little bit later.
Is that because it's unachievable for him to get another bike? I know
I think so at this point. I know his parents didn't encourage it. It was like kind of what he was, it's like for many of us, it's that extra that like connects us to the world, and they didn't see value in it. And I don't want to speak too much for him, but he did pop up on Instagram yesterday after I posted a reel, and I was like, message me, like, we need to talk. So I feel like I get to do my like helping and outreach in whatever way I can. I have not applied for a Chinese visa. I am hoping to go back to Tibet. There is a very high likelihood that I've been blacklisted, so we don't know if that's going to happen or not, but I will try and see what happens.
Because of your work talking about their communities?
Yeah, I do use a pen name for some things I do, so people can't really track me down so much. And some people have been like, you don't get credit for your work. I'm like, it's not about that. Like, I also don't want to put these people at risk. Like, China, they can go through my WeChat messages. They can go through everything, and like bus ticket receipts, they can find out where I've been. So it's not about that. I think that's about it. I'm at a transition point with career right now. Career wise, commercially, I am a photographer of interiors and buildings and hotel rooms. Like, that's where I make my money. And
that's what my husband does as well.
Really?
Yeah. He's a photographer, yeah, for interior, yeah, and architecture.
How does he feel about it? Without revealing too much, without me asking him. He likes it though.
Enjoys. He enjoys because, he's been a photographer for since forever. He was a pro surfer turned photographer, and he loved photojournalism, but it's just such a tough life, such a tough life.
He gets
Uh,
it.
yeah. So he's happy doing architecture. Yeah. And it pays the bills.
You just said everything I was going to say. And yeah, I like really cool design. I like meeting new people every time. And for the last 7 years, I've specialized in hotels. And I always think, working in a hotel wouldn't be that bad. Like, it's kind of exciting. Like, there's crazy stuff going on every day. But yeah, so
Yeah. And
that's
you
my
get to
commercial
travel
work.
too. You go to different hotels, different countries. So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of
That's
a glamour.
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
not too bad. I'm a little concerned about AI, but we'll see what happens. But also I made a post on Instagram. It's only been recently that I can look at what I've done for the last 15 years with I don't want to say that it's important, but I can finally look at it as like, oh, this is kind of meaningful work. When at the time, like even though Instagram existed, I learned that I didn't like posting my trips in real time because it took me out of the moment and it was a distraction and it just like took me away from why I was there. And sometimes I think I learned this during my bike tour. It almost becomes performative. At the end of my bike tour, after I'd been in Tibet, the way people interacted with my social media, I can understand how it gets in somebody's head and you think, I need to perform for the public. And I was able to catch that at a young enough age and so long ago, so 2012, caught it. Oh, it becomes performative. I don't want that. So I don't do trips in real time, but then balancing my adventures with real life work, I have so much footage and media, and I had actually forgot about video I had taken in Tibet in 2019, like because I would go out there, do my trips, come home, try to make money to go back out there. And so like 15 years later, I'm looking at this stuff going, my goodness, like my stacks of notebooks with notes and like my hard drives. It's just so I'm at this point where I'm like, okay, I need to still do my commercial work, but maybe I'm looking for a new creative outlet. And I think maybe writing and the video. So that's kind of, and then just going through these archives and also knowing that the next time I go out there, I'll be better at note taking because I hate the fact that like I've lost names, I've lost date, and I really hate that that's happened. But I tell myself maybe this lull in travel has allowed me to learn what not to do next time.
Yeah. Always learning. And you
Mhm.
are quite busy. I I am really looking forward to your writing. I think that will be super interesting. Would there be pictures, you think, or just right?
Yeah, I do want pictures. I took enough that I think it would be unworthy. I was actually thinking about like more of a like a newspaper print. So things are really cheap, just self-published, sell it for like $5. I really like that zine, like self-publishing DIY. The the photos don't need to be high quality, but just little things here and there.
When you go back, would you be on a bike again or not this time?
I left my mountain bike in Ladakh, so it's there. And then if I go back to Tibet, oh, I had a list of all these adventures and routes. I was telling Eric, my partner, the other night, I was like, I had a notebook of routes that I researched and I talked to locals, like old trade routes that were no longer used. And like people my age didn't know, but when I would talk to their parents who are in their 70s, they're like, oh, yeah, that's an old like horse trade route. And I'm just like, yeah, because I researched it. Like I had so many routes that I was gonna do. And
Do you still have those routes down somewhere?
yeah, yeah, I know where they are.
So I think you need a bike.
Yeah, I there was a holy mountain that I was gonna ride my bike around. That was what I had that titanium bike that I had built right after COVID. That's what it was actually set up for, was to go back out to Tibet because After my bike tour, I just did on foot adventures, a lot of long distance walking, a lot of hiking, trekking, some hitchhiking, because I knew that if I got on a bike, I might never stop. Like once I start pedaling and feel that freedom, it was going to be like, yeah, no, I'm not going back. So I kind of like pulled in the reins a little bit on that. But yeah, that's the whole thing with like 5 years ago and having to leave. I Things were just starting to like kind of cement with Tibet. People kind of knew me as like, oh, that woman that's out in Tibet that like does all this stuff. Like it was really starting, but then at the same time, it's like, oh, the government's probably catching on too at the same time. But we'll see what happens. A year from now, my plans may be completely different, but I do know that creating media to get other people's stories out is definitely where my heart lies.
Yeah, and it's super important. So I thank you for being this courageous, fearless woman that is going to these remote regions of the world and telling us those stories. Thank you so much for sharing so transparently and so deeply. I am so honored that we met and our paths cross, and I hope we can meet each other some day, or maybe I'll even join you if possible in one of those adventures, and keep my fingers crossed if you do want to go that you get your visa and everything goes smoothly.
Well, thanks for having me and thanks for doing what you do. It's nice to have a unique voice out there that's a little less me, and a little more look at this and look at them and meet them and let's talk to this person. So thank you for that. We need more of that.
Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted to. There's so many cool people and stories out there, and I wanted to hear more. And I thought, I'm just going to do the podcast because we need to share. A lot of people want to listen. So thanks for sharing yours.
Oh, no problem.
And that's all for today's episode. I want to thank the listeners for tuning in. Your support means everything. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider following, leaving a review, and sharing it with your friends.